Joining us now, the former Mets right-hander and color commentator for national baseball coverage on TBS, and of course, for the Mets TV broadcasts on SNY and Pix Network, author of the book, 108 Stitches, out tomorrow wherever books are sold, a new friend of our show, Ron Darling. Ron, how is the new Mets season treating you?
Oh, it's treating me great. Thank you guys for having me on. And anytime I hear the former Mets right-hander, it always makes me laugh. I don't know why.
Well, I mean, you are one of the staples of that '86 Mets team. So I can't, you're not that far from being a player. It hasn't been that long. So to me, I still associate you with a pitching rotation. You know.
Yeah, I wish that were true, but it's further and further away from. When I sign pictures of me playing, I always look at it and say it looks exactly like my son's. So it's a very strange world to live in, but always very proud of my time with the Orange and Blue.
I mean, as you should be. And speaking of the Orange and Blue, the new wave of New York Mets, Pete Alonso is introducing himself quite nicely. Jeff McNeil, we're going to see a full year out of him. Cano comes back to New York. First off, what are your thoughts so far? Only through one series, I get it, but what is your thoughts so far of the Mets season?
Well, I don't think you could be any happier, even though they lost on the last day, the great comeback to get even against the closer. When I played, we used to always mark those games. Even if you didn't win those games, you marked them when you did some damage to their closer. So that means something probably down the road. You couldn't be happier because you have a combination of older players that can still play, Ramos and, of course, Cano. But you also have this great young exuberance of McNeils and Alonsos and others that I think are just really shaped the team up in a nice way. So you don't know what's going to happen over the summer. You know, they've got great starting pitching. Their bullpen, we'll see how it goes. They definitely are better than they were last year, or at least revamped it. But I just really, really enjoy to see this. Every team in baseball that's good has young, everyday players in their lineup, and the Mets are starting to get some in there themselves.
Absolutely, and we're talking to Ron Darling right here live on WHPC Sports Talk on the Voice of Nassau Community College 90.3 WHPC. Let's talk about, that's the good stuff. That's the great stuff. And, of course, obviously, the terrific showing you got out of Jacob deGrom, Game 1. Mickey Callaway and some of the decision-making, albeit that first game, it worked out, subbing in Seth Lugo for Jacob deGrom. Broxton for Michael Conforto had a few people scratching heads. It turns out to work, but some of the decision-making, do you think this is still some just kind of tweaking things, seeing what kind of team he has, or is Mickey Callaway a mad genius?
I think it's a combination of a few things, and the most important being is that the relationship under pressure in regular season games of Riggleman and Callaway working together, I think it's a thing I'm going to be really looking at. Callaway, wants to make his mark. He's got a guy that can really help, and I think the lines of communication and how quickly they come to decisions is something that I'm going to really be interested to watch. And does it evolve or change over time? I think that's another interesting thing to evolve. Listen, this game, more than any time in the history of the game, you got to be able to run a bullpen. You can't run a bullpen, you can't manage in the major leagues, and those are the moves I think that are the most important. Yes, changing the guy defensively, that's a good move. Pinch running for a guy, that's a move. Double switching is a move, but taking out one pitcher to bring someone else in is the most important move.
Now, you touched on it a little bit. You mentioned Jim Riggleman. Now, that was one of the most underrated moves that I believe that the Mets did this offseason in getting a guy that's been there in terms of a managerial spot for Mickey Callaway, because, his first-time manager, long-time pitching guru, pitching coach with the Indians, who you kind of figured was going to help out this Mets rotation with deGrom, Syndergaard, Vargas, Matz, Wheeler. You figured he was going to help him, but the fact that Jim Riggleman was brought in, I believe that speaks volumes of him as to guide Mickey Callaway through the season. What do you think about that hire?
I think it's going to be a collaboration where he's going to really be able to help. And I think his biggest selling point for Jim is that he's a National League guy through and through, so he knows the game. Many more moves to make in the National League than you have to make in the American League, and it's good for a number of years. So I think his age and his experience can only help Mickey, and let's hope together they can collaborate on moves, and that Mickey can pick the right ones.
I was also just going to ask, I know it's only been 3 games, but what are the moves with Cali that you've liked and what you haven't liked so far?
There's been a couple. I like the switching on defense. I think Alonso, until he gets more experience, Dominic Smith is a much a better player. I would have switched out Broxton for Nimmo.
My last real question is the rotation. It obviously isn't perfect. I mean, Jacob deGrom was fantastic. Zach Wheeler and Syndergaard, 4 runs given up their first outings. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't terrible. My question is, do you think this is something too early in the season to get up in arms about it? Or Syndergaard seems to have been a relatively, especially over the last couple of years, a slow starter, and his health has been a concern. Wheeler, we saw how electric he was down the line last year. Do you think this rectifies itself, or is it cause for concern?
No cause for concern. It'll rectify itself. I don't think I would ever, if I were a manager, I would never judge a pitcher's first start. First starts are strange. They're nerve-wracking. You spend all day anticipating the moment. Once you get into a role and you start making starts every 5th day, it becomes somewhat routine. So until they're in a routine, I don't really judge their routine. And it's not like Syndergaard and Wheeler were awful. Wheeler made 1 bad pitch to Trey Turner, and Syndergaard with the home run given up to Robles. So I think as the first start goes, they were strong. I think more importantly, Syndergaard, Wheeler, and deGrom are going to be great. My eyes are going to be on the left-handers, Matz and Vargas, because a lot of times when you have a good rotation, or at least a good top of the rotation, how well those guys at the bottom do. And if you're not going to have both guys do well, you need at least one to be great.
We're talking to Ron Darling, SNY and Picks broadcaster for the New York Mets. Ron, let's get on to the book, because we have a copy of it in studio here. We all can't wait to really delve into it, but we've already got a chance to really kind of get into your mind about all the people you've been connected with through your history in baseball. 108 Stitches, Loose Threads, Ripping Yarns, and the darndest characters from my time in the game, written by Ron Darling. My first question is, it comes out tomorrow at wherever books are sold. This is your 3rd book. Do you still get nervous, around the time a new book gets released, new content about you gets released, or is it just kind of fun to do it?
No, well, it's fun to do it. I think it gets you get a little nervous because books are like your children, like
yes.
your debutante children. You're releasing them to the world, and so, you always want a good response if you can get one. But I think the process of writing a book, anyone who's done it, is the most enjoyable part, because you're trying to really put together this jigsaw puzzle of information that you have in your brain. And, for me, 108 stitches is how many stitches it takes to make a baseball. And I had probably close to 200 stories that I whittled down to 108, and hoping that each one is tied to the other, so it forms not only a good book at the end, just like 108 Stitches forms a good baseball.
Now, Ron, just sticking in the terms of the book, plenty of characters you've met over your time in the game. 2 of them really come to mind. That's Doc and Darryl. So
yeah.
What impact did they have on not only your life in the game, but just your career in general?
Well, the impact that they had on my career is just the ability to watch their greatness at such a young age. And, of course, the disappointment, not in them, disappointment in what they went through as addicts and trying to fight their way through that. We had a great ball club. We lost Doc and Dwight for a significant amount of time because of the disease that they had. And so it was a unique relationship. I always thought when they first came up that Dwight was going to have kind of Roger Clemens' career, and Darryl was going to have Barry Bonds' career. I mean, that's the kind of talent they were. For some reason, many reasons, that didn't work out. But it doesn't make me think about them any differently than I did when they were young players, like I was just trying to make it work. Good guys who got on the wrong side, and I've seen them recently, and they seem to be in great health and good form, and that's the most important thing.
Also, how are you able to make the book, and how? Also, I mean, what was your mindset before you actually were able to make a book about it?
Well, I think that this is my 30th year, either being in a uniform or a suit in the booth, and you just meet so many people, and the process of it is on the road. I have so much time off before the game that I just would write down these stories, and how it came to be is that once you write down one story, it reminds you of another story of someone else you knew. And once those things started happening, then it starts to take form, and then you start to think maybe you can get a book out of this. And it ended up with a lot more stories than I needed, but it was fun to do it anyway.
Well, we're talking to Ron Darling, and it's kind of last licks here as we let him go. Obviously, very busy schedule. We were extraordinarily lucky for him to give us a couple minutes. Obviously, not your first book, but maybe getting close. I mean, Game 7. It was just a fantastic trip into that moment. But for me, this book is just sort of touching. And the same way, just the stitches of the people you've met in your life, one story reminds you of another. One story hit me in particular, and it wasn't even a crazy story about it. Frank Viola, you're very well connected with, and it just popped in my head because I went to school with his niece, Heather, and I remember asking her all the time about him. But yeah, one of the greatest college games ever pitched between you and he. So, I mean, that was one of the stories that jumped out at me, that I'm unintentionally intertwined with Ron Darling. So there you go. It's great for the reader.
If I'd have known that, I would have made it 109.
So I'm just saying, I think that's a wonderful part about this book, how it really can captivate and include the reader. It's a hard thing to do, and you nailed it brilliantly. I guess my last thing is, you've met Mickey Mantle. What was that, as a Yankee fan personally, just to let you know, what was your experience like meeting Mickey?
Well, it's like meeting royalty. It's like meeting a demigod. It's just that, the Yankees from yesteryear were just, great every single year. That's what you heard of. I was a Red Sox fan, so of course, got to see the Yankees and the Red Sox a lot. And it was just, an honor to hang out with them and to have a moment in the sun with them. And, I tell it in the book, but I'll never forget it as long as I live.
Now, Ron, my last question is honestly one of my favorite things that the Mets have done, also coming from a Yankee fan, by the way, is obviously the news about Tom Seaver and what the Mets did. Very, very classy in my mind. This is one of my favorite stories, is that, and honestly, things that came to fruition, is that they honored him, basically, and what he's done for the organization by renaming Citi Field, the address that it is playing on, at 41 Seaver Way. I just wanted to get your thoughts of Tom Seaver and what the Mets did.
Well, Seaver is the franchise. You don't get a nickname like that unless you're one of the most special people that ever played the game. And he changed that team from lovable losers to teams that had a lot of fight and won. The impossible dream of winning the World Series in '69, which was their first winning season. There's just so many reasons that I don't know. Like, I know in today's world that there's a lot of money to be made by corporations to name your ballpark, and I think Citi Field is such a beautiful place. But if I were a Mets fan, I would call it the Seaver. So 41 Seaver Way is the first start toward it. once they get a beautiful likeness of Tom, sculpture out in front where people can take pictures and meet each other before they go into the Jackie Robinson Rotunda, the better. Because you can't get enough Seaver when you're talking about this organization.
Ron, thank you so much for a couple minutes. Ron Darling, everybody. Will you be still doing the game today, or is this you're kind of going around going to interrupt with that?
Yeah, no, I brushed off Gary and Keith today.
Come on.
I'll be like you guys watching the game on TV, okay?
And we will absolutely look for your return soon. Ron Darling, everybody, author of The Complete Game, author of Game 7, 1986, and now 108 Stitches. We thank you for your time, Ron. Thank you so much for a few minutes.